Hey guys, hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be talking about the top 10 meta Pokemon trading card game decks for the month of May 2024. And I know some people want to see the rogue decks, so if you guys want to see the top 10 rogue decks, in my opinion, then let's see if we can get this video to 1,000 thumbs up. And the second we hit 1,000 thumbs up, we will drop the top 10 rogue deck video. For the comment question of the day, I want to hear from you guys. What are your top favorite decks you're playing right now? I'll have timestamps for each of these decks, so if you guys want to go back and refresh your mind on some of the decks or just skip to a particular deck, you can do so. And for each of these decks, I'm going to be going over some of the small fundamentals of each deck. I'll also talk about some of the matchup spreads, some of the pros, some of the cons as to why you may or may not want to play some of these decks. And of course, if you guys want to buy any Pokemon cards at all, check out my eBay store linked down below. I'm going to be doing a huge restock of a bunch of like very high rarity cards and a lot of other playstamp stuff tonight, so be on the lookout for that. And of course, you can check out the affiliates and sponsors of the channel, Comfy Hobbies with code SneakerTalk and Manta Trading with code SneakerTalk TCG. That'll get you 5% off each of the stores. Coming in at number 10, we have Lugia VSTAR. Today's deck list I'm sharing with you guys was played by Zach Lesage, one of the top players in the game. This is his list that got 19th place at the Orlando, Florida Pokemon Regionals. The average cost of this deck, if you want to build it from scratch, is about $100 US. And this deck is all about straight consistency because, as you guys know, Lugia is not the most consistent deck out there, so Zach went for a very turbo or consistent build of Lugia VSTAR. This deck kind of crumbles if you're not able to set up double Archeops in your discard pile on turn 2, so you can use Lugia VSTAR to bring them back out from the discard pile. And as some of you guys know, Lugia VSTAR has fallen from the graces of being the best deck in format, kind of like how Charizard is right now, and that's because all of the amazing rare attackers have rotated out of the game. However, in the most recent set, Temporal Forces, we have the new inclusions of Minccino and Cinccino to be your main attackers for this deck. You could say this is colorless Lugia because you also have that Snorlax with the unfazed bat ability also in this deck. And yeah, basically all this deck is about is setting up your Lugia VSTAR on turn 2, trying to get your Archeops in the discard pile, and then set up your single prize attackers to do a ton of damage every single turn, hopefully winning the prize trade because you're going to be ideally attacking with single prize attackers the entire game. And if you don't have to have Lugia VSTAR on the board or your Lumineon V, you're going to want to try and collapse those as soon as possible so you have no 2 prize liabilities left. Lugia VSTAR has a very strong matchup into Charizard EX, so if you are kind of an anti-Charizard player, Lugia is definitely a top contender for that. The A-spec of choice for this deck is Master Ball, and that is just because it really helps with the consistency issues that this deck does run into from time to time. And of course, there is a decent amount of luck involved with this deck because we are running for Capturing Aroma, which is a coin flip, and it's going to guarantee you get a Pokemon, but heads for an evolution, tails for a basic. And you also have Great Ball in here too to search the top 7 cards of your deck for any Pokemon at all. You also have supporter cards in this deck like Jacques, which you don't really usually see in a lot of decks. This will just help you grab those double Archeops if you need to. And of course, you've got Serena. Usually decks don't play Serena, but Lugia VSTAR is one of those decks that really take advantage of Serena because you have the option to either discard cards from your hand to draw more or use it as a gusting option like Boss's Orders would be. Another supporter that people are testing out with this deck is the Morty's Conviction supporter card, which I'd have to say has some pretty solid synergy with this deck. But if you wanted to play Lugia, play this version that Zach Lesage has crafted. I would highly recommend it for any aspiring Lugia players out there. Coming in at number 9 is a deck that a bunch of us local Canadians here in the Greater Toronto area used at the Orlando, Florida Regionals. We had 5 players all run this exact same 60 card list for Arceus Giratina VSTAR. This exact same 60 card deck got 125th, 98th, 65th, 45th, and the highest was 11th place at the Orlando, Florida Regionals. And the biggest inclusion to this list, which is questionable for a lot of other players out there that don't believe in the sauce, is the trekking shoes. You guys know I'm a huge sneakerhead, so to see a deck with shoes do this well, this consistently, it is a very strong deck. The main strat for this deck is you have Arceus and Arceus VSTAR that you want to set up along with your barrel draw engine, and you're basically going to use your Arceuses or Arceus VSTARs or Arcei, I don't know how the plural pronunciation is, to charge up your Giratina Vs so your Giratina VSTARs can do that 280 lost impact each turn. And of course, there's some Pokemon out there that don't have 280 HP, some have 330, aka Charizard. So with the help of Maximum Belt, you're able to hit that 330 HP threshold, which is very useful. and because you are using grass energies in this deck, you do get to take advantage of Iron Leaves EX, which has a fantastic ability of when you do bench it from your hand, you get to move it to the active and bring in a bunch of energies along with it. So you have a kind of surprise one-shot answer into Charizard, if so be it. The School Vet in this deck is used to help reset your hand so you can draw more cards off of barrel, and you also have Radiant Gardevoir in this deck to help protect your Arceus V-Stars and your Giratina V-Stars from getting hit for 280 by the mirror match or other decks out there that run V Pokemon that can eventually hit 280. So much of this deck relies on a very strong first and second turn, being able to set up Arceus turn 1 and Arceus V-Star turn 2. Because Path to the Peak is gone, you are also now guaranteed to be able to Starbirth on your turn 2, being able to grab whatever 2 cards you need to set you up for success for later on in the game. This is by far one of the best Arceus piles that you can play. I would highly recommend Arceus Giratina V-Star to pretty much all players of any level. Coming in at number 8, we have Ancient Box. Ancient Box is probably going to be the cheapest deck you can build that is a meta deck right now. This deck is about $40 to put together, and the list you are looking at was played by Jake Ewart that got second place at the Orlando Regional Championships. This deck was not a thing until Temporal Forces released, and that's because we now have a bunch of these new attackers for Ancient Box. We have the new Roaring Moon that's not an EX. We also have the Fluttermane to help shut down your opponent's abilities early on, and of course we got Koraidon for some early game pressure, and you also have Great Tuscan here as well for some surprise MILF factor. Now the fun thing about this deck is it gets stronger and stronger as the game progresses, because your main attacker for this deck is Roaring Moon, and you're going to get to do 10 more damage for each ancient card in your discard pile. So this deck is all about turboing through your deck, going through it as quick as you can so you can fill up your discard pile with ancient cards to make your one prize attacker stronger and stronger. A really good thing that this deck has going for it is the Ancient Booster Energy Capsule card. It allows your Roaring Moon to become 200 HP, and there aren't too many Lost Vacuums running around in this current format, so it is hard for some decks to combat against a 200 HP single prize Pokemon turn after turn after turn. Some of the drawbacks to this deck is that there are only really 2 ancient supporters out there. We have Professor Sada's Vitality, which is critical for setting up some big turns of attacking, and Energy Acceleration, because it's your only form of Energy Acceleration in this deck. And then we have the other supporter card for Ancient, which is Explorer's Guidance, which is a very, very painful one to play. If you know the pain of Chorus Experiment and Flower Selecting, this is going to bring back similar kind of feels. You have to draw 6 cards, and you discard 4. Bruh. Yeah, that means you're gonna +2 very good cards, but you're losing 4 to your discard pile. Ideally, you're tossing in some energies so your Sadas can hit better in the future turn, or so you're throwing away some ancient cards so your Roaring Moons can hit for higher numbers on those particular turns. Some of the really strong inclusions in this list is the Penny to allow you to just reset a single prize Roaring Moon attacker that did tank a hit. You also have 4 copies of Pokegear 3.0 in here. You also have the only deck, I believe, that plays Awakening Drum Ace Spec card. When you play this item card from your hand, you get to draw a card for each ancient Pokemon on your board, which is very, very handy. And of course, playing that card will also boost your damage numbers up, and it synergizes as well with Pokestop. This is one of the few decks in the game right now that run Pokestop outside of the Chien-Pao deck. So using Pokestop can feel very painful at times if you do hit a Professor Sada's Vitality or a boss, for example, but we do have a copy of Pal Pad to try and recover those important resources back into the deck. And then you have 1 copy of Fire Energy in here too, just in case you want to pull off that Shred attack with the single prize Koraidon, which doesn't come up too often, but it is very useful to have access to that particular energy, especially because they are searchable cards with Earthen Vessel and Superior Energy Retrieval. There really aren't too many great single prize decks in the format right now, so this probably is the strongest single prize deck out there, along with one of the best budget decks out there too. So if you want to play a deck that's about $40 that performed really well at the Orlando Regionals, getting second, and has a lot of potential, then I would highly recommend this deck. Now, the Charizard matchup is a little sketchy. It did lose to Charizard in the finals, but this deck has really strong matchups against decks like Chien-Pao and other decks that can struggle to hit that 200 HP threshold again and again and again, losing the prize trade because you're going to keep attacking into single prizes, and that's kind of annoying when you're doing so much damage but only getting 1 prize card for each Pokemon. Coming in at number 7, we have Pidgeot EX Control. Yes, there's a control deck on this list. I wouldn't necessarily recommend bringing this deck here like locals or best of 1 kind of tournament. This is definitely a deck you want to play in a best of 3. The deck list you are actually looking at is provided by Alessandro Cremescoli, who got 3rd place at the European International Championships. Now this deck is about $65 US, and there is a lot of one-off copies in this deck. Pidgeot EX is a really strong card, and being able to grab a card from your deck every single turn is very, very good. And if you only have one copy of each card, well, if you can just search it out every single turn, you can kind of get away with having a single copy of each of the particular one-off cards in this deck. Now, the really cool thing about this control deck is that not only are you playing this control style, but you're also able to take prize cards. Typically, control decks are known for winning with alternate win conditions. Think about like Snorlax Control or the Block Control deck. That deck doesn't really take prizes at all for any reason, but this deck has the ability to attack with the Giratina Charizard, can attack and close out games with the Chien-Pao EX to mill your opponent, and say you're playing against an opponent that has only basic attackers, then you can use Noivern EX and that first attack to basically lock them out of the game from attacking, and you of course have Pokemon like Luxray to annoy your opponent to discard important resources from their hand with the Fang Snipe attack. Now, like any control deck, these are decks that I do not recommend to beginners or intermediate players by any means, because there is such a high skill ceiling for these decks. You really want to know the in and outs of the actual 60 card list, but also you really need to know the overall meta very well to know the different win conditions you are trying to go for and also trying to deny from your opponents. So if you want to play control and you want to play probably one of the best control decks that you can, take a look at this list and give it a go. Coming in at number 6 is a deck I just covered on the channel because they made a League battle deck for it recently. We have Gardevoir EX. Yeah, Gardevoir EX is still in the top 10 after all these ups and downs, even after rotation, after losing key cards like Zacian V, Mew from Celebrations, and the Shining Arcana Gardevoir EX. This deck is still very, very good, and it also thrives in a format where there's a lot less of Miraidon, and well, maybe not less Miraidon, but less Iron Hands running around, because Iron Hands was the main threat for this deck, and because of Charizard being so dominant right now, seeing those future Hands decks and those Miraidon decks is kind of rare. You don't see them as often as you used to, and so if you're a Gardevoir player, you'll find some comfort knowing that those harder matchups are not as popular now. One of the decks in the game that has been always around and always great, always strong. It used to thrive on being one of those decks that could have a very strong late game and have a very strong comeback potential with cards like Counter Catcher and Reversal Energy and Shining Arcana Gardevoir. However, after rotation, this deck has since had to pivot into different type of attackers and slightly different kind of playstyle. So of course in this deck we're going to have the 4/4 line of Ralts and Kirlia, 2 Gardevoir EX, but the main attackers for this deck are Drifloon, Screamtail, Mimikyu, and sometimes Fluttermane from time to time. So ideally you want to start the game off with Klefki or Fluttermane in the active, and then you're going to be attacking again and again and again with Drifloon and Screamtail, and you're either going to be spamming Arven or Iono pretty much every single turn since there's 4 copies of each. Arven is great because you're able to grab consistency cards like Buddy Buddy Poffin, Nest Ball, Ultra Ball, Counter Catcher, Super Rod, and of course Evo TM. So on your turn 2, if you went first, which is ideal for this deck, you're able to Evo TM, ideally with like a Mimikyu or a Fluttermane or a Klefki, and evolve your Ralts into Kirlias. You also have the tools that you can use like Hero's Cape, Luxurious Cape, and Bravery Charm to buff up the HP numbers of your attackers like Drifloon and Screamtail, since those Pokemon get to do more damage the more HP that they have, since Gardevoir is going to keep stacking energies and damage counters on those Pokemon. If you're going to be doing some plays to attack the bench, you're going to want to be able to boss up and Counter Catcher an opponent's Pokemon into the active that doesn't really help them progress their board state, so then you can just start attacking with Screamtail and take some big knockouts again and again and again, or you can go for some big one-shot damage with Drifloon. Now, in the past we didn't see Gardevoir EX attack too often, but this deck you actually see Gardevoir EX attack from time to time, often closing out games, attacking some supporter Pokemon, because Gardevoir does swing for 190 HP, and that's a good amount of damage. The list you're looking at right now was played by Joshua Frink and got 3rd place at the Orlando Pokemon TCG Regionals, and is the second least expensive deck list I'm showing you guys today. The cheapest one being, of course, Ancient Box at $40 US, but this one is about $50 US, and that's just because Gardevoir and a lot of the cards in these decks, and this deck in particular, have been reprinted and reprinted and reprinted. So the cost for these cards has gone down significantly. So if you want to play Pokemon at a highly competitive level, but on a budget, this is definitely a deck I can recommend. Just be mindful when you are playing with Gardevoir, you're not also playing against your opponent, but you're also playing against the clock. So it really does help to practice this deck a whole bunch, whether it's online or in person ideally, because there's a lot of decision making that goes involved with this deck when it comes to doing things like refinement and a lot of different plays and sequencing that can come up where you want to make sure you maximize your odds of drawing into the right cards with Refinement and with Radiant Greninja every single time. Gardevoir has gone down a lot in popularity. However, the true tryhards and the ones who are living and dying by the Psychic Embrace ability, a lot of these players that are still playing Gardevoir know the deck very well. So if you see someone playing Gardevoir, do not underestimate them. There's a good chance they've been playing it for a while, or else they wouldn't be playing such a high skill ceiling deck in a meta where you can play other decks that require less thinking. Coming in at number 5 is a deck I absolutely am a huge fan of because it has one of my favorite attackers in the game, Iron Hands EX, and that is Future Box or Turbo Hands. A lot of Miraidon players who enjoyed it in the past format with Flaffy or with Peony, they've switched over to this turbo version of Iron Hands featuring all these future Pokemon. This deck is all about setting up your little baby Miraidon, attacking with that, throwing those energies onto your Iron Hands, and then having your Iron Hands amp you very much a whole bunch with the help of Iron Crown EX helping out with that extra damage boost on the board. And of course, you have important tools in this deck like Future Booster Energy Capsule and Heavy Baton to continue the onslaught of Amp You Very Much and Iron Hands attacking again and again and again. And also, if you don't know who Yuho Kalama is, he was the winner of the Latin American International Championships with Turbo Miraidon as well. So if you want to keep playing Miraidon, there's a Miraidon in this deck right here. The deck is still really fun. It is super linear. If you want a very straightforward linear turbo style of deck, I'd highly recommend this deck. Just do keep in mind that Charizard is going to be your worst matchup, and there's a lot of Charizards out there. But if you want to be brave, take this deck for a walk and see if you can amp you very much a whole lot of other decks out there other than Charizard. On to deck number 4. Number 4 is a deck that has been raising in popularity, and that's because it's been getting a lot of consistent day 2 conversions over the last couple of major events, and it's just performing really well. It's another straightforward turbo style of deck. If you're a fan of that kind of deck, well, this deck might be more for you because it has a better matchup into Charizard than the Turbo Hands did. We're talking about Moon Dun Dun, or Roaring Moon the Dunsparce. I know Galarian Moltres V rotating was painful for a lot of the Roaring Moon EX players out there, but there is reason to rejoice because we have the new and improved Dunsparce engine in this deck. This is the deck that is taking the most advantage out of the Dunsparce engine. So real quick, let's talk about Dunsparce and Dunsparce. First of all, we have a 3/3 line of these boys right here, and Dunsparce has a free retreat, and the Dunsparce has the ability where it gets to run away into your deck and you draw 3 cards. So fantastic synergy for this deck. You have 2 fantastic ways to accelerate energy in this deck. We have Dark Patch, and we also have Professor Sada's Vitality. So it is not too crazy or not too out there to randomly just drop a Roaring Moon EX from your hand and go Dark Patch, Sada, attach, and then your Roaring Moon is now swinging with Calamity Storm or Frenzy Gouging, whatever's in the active. If your Roaring Moon has 290 HP with that Ancient Booster Energy Capsule, that is just another big final boss your opponent has to deal with. This deck is all about going fast, going turbo, and digging through it as quick as possible with the help of cards like Radiant Greninja to guarantee you have those dark energies in your discard pile, so you can use those for Dark Patches or for Professor Sada's Vitality. You also have Trekking Shoes in here too to help you see more cards, so you can, discard what you don't need and just draw what you want. And of course, the ace spec of choice for this deck is going to have to be Prime Catcher. Since you aren't necessarily flooding your board with a ton of ancient Pokemon, it's not going to take advantage of that Awakening Drum ace spec that we saw in the Ancient Box deck. And another thing to note is that this deck has 3 copies of Artisan. So each time you throw your Dunsparce away back into your deck, you're going to use Artisan to bring back a Dunsparce onto your bench. And that free retreat from the Dunsparce is incredible. Also, the list you guys are looking at right now was by Mark Hostrup. It got 7th place at the European International Championships, and it's about $70 US. So it's not too expensive either. Coming in at number 3 is a super popular deck in the Greater Toronto area, and it used to have an amazing matchup into Charizard. Now a lot of people are calling it 50-50, we're gonna call this deck, well, we're not gonna call this deck, the actual deck is called Chien-Pao EX, or Chien-Pao Baxcalibur. The exact 60 card deck you guys are looking at right now is played by 4 top players. Lucas Singh, who actually won the local cup we had recently at Comfy Hobbies. He's also 3rd in Canada. He got 48th with this deck in Orlando. We have John Eng, another top player who won a regional earlier this season. He got 25th with this deck. We have Grant Shen, another top player who's been piloting Chien-Pao on and off again throughout this last year to great success. He was also known as the CEO of Chien-Pao for quite some time. Grant Shen got 18th, and the highest placement with this list was played by Reagan Retzloff, who got 4th place at the Orlando Regionals. This deck has so many great things going for it, from energy acceleration with Baxcalibur to helping you see those energies with Chien-Pao, to big one-shot options with Chien-Pao EX for slaying those Charizards, those dragons out there. You have Vibero as your draw engine, along with Radiant Greninja, which is also an attacker that can attack two different Pokemon at the same time. And then of course you have Iron Hands in here as well, with 1 copy of Lightning Energy, so you can amp you very much your opponent at different points of the game. And you got Iron Bundle in here to force your opponent to bring in a different active Pokemon in case you do not want to swing into a particular thing. So really great if you want your opponent to give you a 1 prizer that you can amp, or a 2 prizer that you can just swing and take 2 prizes from. This is a deck that really is scary to play for some players because it can be bricky at times, but when it sets up, when it's cooking, it really cooks. It has so much potential. The skill ceiling is super high. It's one of these decks that really rewards those who grind it out and practice with it an absolute ton. There's so much sequencing involved with this deck, so you can lose to yourself if you miss sequence. That's one thing for sure. One of the best things that this deck has going for it is a really solid matchup spread across the board, especially into Charizard. A lot of people would say this deck was favored going into Charizard, but these days a lot of players are just saying it's a straight up 50-50. But hey, if you're going into the best deck in format, that is the most popular deck as well, that's a 50-50 matchup, then this is a deck you definitely want to consider, and you're not going to have to be scared of Charizard anymore if you were playing a deck that was kind of scared of Charizard before playing this. Some notable inclusions for this list, of course, are the 4 copies of Irida. Irida is like the best card in the game for water type decks. You're able to grab a water Pokemon and a item of your choice, and all the water Pokemon in this deck are good. All the items in this deck are good. You're usually going to grab a Baxcalibur and Rare Candy. Some other amazing cards in this deck are Cypher Maniacs, Code Breaking. Being able to stack the top 2 cards of your deck in any way you want is very strong. It has amazing synergy with Radiant Greninja because you can just draw those 2 cards for 1 water energy. You could draw those cards with Vibero, or say you don't have a draw option, well, you can use Pokestop to mill those cards, and you can mill item cards if you want for that matter, so they just go straight to your hand. So if you want to stack a Prime Catcher on top of your deck, and maybe a Super Rod or a Rare Candy, you can do that, and it just guarantees it goes into your hand. Cancel Link Cologne in here too, so you are always able to do some big plays with Radiant Greninja when the time comes. Now, although this deck has a very good matchup spread across the board, it does have a tough time dealing with the deck I just showed you guys a second ago, the Roaring Moon, the Dunsparce deck, along with Ancient Box decks too, because getting to that 200 number with Chien-Pao is going to require 4 energies each time, and so you're going to basically have to use Superior Energy Retrieval each time to slay a single prize Pokemon. On to the number 2 deck for the month of May 2024. We have Lost Giratina VSTAR. So the list you guys are looking at right here was played by a bunch of players at EUIC. We have Alex Hill, who got 164th, Rahul Reddy, who got 140th, John Eng, who got 112th, Kian Amini, who got 106th, and most notably, Isaiah Bradner, the finalist, who came in 2nd place at EUIC with Lost Giratina. Fortunately, Giratina VSTAR is still a very strong deck, so if you were piloting it mainly before this new format, before rotation, your skill set is going to be able to take advantage of all the exact same cards for the most part. The big changes to this list is that we do lose Path to the Peak, we do lose VIP Pass. You're going to have to rely on those Nest Balls to set up your Giratinas, but we have Buddy Buddy Poffin in exchange to set up your Comfies and your Shuppets as well. A big notable thing for this deck is that it has a 2-2 line of Shuppet and Banette. So the first Shuppet has an item lock attack as a coin flip, and then the other 2 Pokemon that evolve from Shuppet are Banette and Banette EX. So Banette EX is very strong against particular decks to item lock them, whether it be Chien-Pao, whether it might be Charizard you're trying to also item lock. You have the Banette EX there for some control option. And then for the other Banette, it actually has an ability where you get to Lost Zone it into your Lost Zone and then grab a supporter from your discard pile and add it to your hand. So it is essentially an extra copy of Chorus's Experiment, an extra copy of Boss's Orders, or an extra copy of Roxanne. Having that built-in consistency that also really helps improve your Lost Zone count is very strong. It's way better than playing a 2-prize liability like Lumineon V, and of course you were able to search it out with Buddy Buddy Poffin in a form of Shuppet and evolve it into Banette. And Banette can also be an attacker where you attack with the, I believe, Poltergeist attack for just 2 psychic energies, or 1 psychic and 1 colorless. Some other notable inclusions to this list is the Iron Leaves EX to help you out in the Charizard EX matchup, and one of the biggest things for this list is the lack of water energy. Yeah. For once, Radiant Greninja is not really going to be attacking at all in this Lost Giratina deck. 5 Psychic, 4 Grass, and 4 Jet. So you want to keep that in mind, that your Greninja is never going to be threatening. So if you are playing against Giratina decks as well, keep note that they might not have water, so you might not have to bench the Manaphy. But this deck does also respect the Greninja plays out there and the Chien-Paos out there, so you have Manaphy in this deck for some built-in bench protection. This deck also has 1 copy of Pokegear 3.0 to help you with a little bit more consistency to just get those choruses when you need them. I really enjoyed Giratina VSTAR before going into rotation with 2 Pokegears. It felt really, really strong. And then you also have Forest Seal Stone in this deck, so you have some more consistency with that card. There's some games where you just don't need to use Star Requiem, so having Forest Seal Stone as some consistency really does help out. And you might notice that there is only 1 copy of Boss's Orders and 1 copy of Counter Catcher, and that's because we have 1 copy of Prime Catcher in this list as well. This deck also does play Temple of Sinnoh and Artisan. The Temple of Sinnoh is very important in the matchups against Charizard in case they do play Miss Energy. And then you have to be careful when you do play Temple of Sinnoh so it doesn't clash, of course, with your Jet Energy. Giratina VSTAR is another one of those decks that really benefit players who practice it and kind of one-trick it and play it a whole bunch, because there's a lot of sequencing involved. This is a very resource management intensive kind of deck, so make sure you're keeping track of the prize cards and of your resources for like Psychic and Grass so that your Pokemon can attack when they want to. Let's get to the number 1 best deck in format, which you can probably guess what it is by now. We are of course talking about Charizard EX, the best deck in format with about a 25% meta share. This deck is insane. I hate this deck. I hate how strong it is. I hate that it destroys one of my favorite decks, in a lot of cases, Miraidon. You're looking at Tord Reklev's list right here from EYC that he got first place with, and this deck was also copied by a ton of other people at the Orlando, Florida regional tournaments, and I believe even the winner of Orlando regionals basically net decked this list and changed 1 to 2 cards. So it is just a testament to how strong this deck is. Now, the big innovations that happened with this deck most recently is not it being Pidgeot Zard or Bibarel Charizard or Bibzard. It is having it all. It has Pidgeot, it has Bibarel, it has Charizard, it has everything you need for a very strong, consistent build. Tord Reklev, for those of you guys who don't know, is known as the GOAT of Pokemon. He's definitely the best player right now in the modern era, without question. Now, there are other variations of this list that other players are playing, of course. Some opt for the maximum belt to help in the mirror match and against other matchups to be more aggressive earlier on. Some builds are playing Miss Energy as well as the Hero's Cape. That really does help in the mirror match and some other matchups as well. This is just the build though that is the most consistent. It has Prime Catcher. It's one of the most universal ace specs out there. A lot of decks can take advantage of it. And if you're watching this video, I hope you know by now what Charizard EX does, but it is just so strong. All it takes is a rare candy Charizard and you just get to really start playing the game and really get to start dominating. It's a deck that gets stronger as the game progresses, because as your opponent takes more prize cards, your Charizard will do more and more damage. You of course have Pidgeot EX in here to search out the cards you need every single turn, which is just absolutely busted. It pairs well with Charizard also being a stage 2, so you have 4 copies of Rare Candy and 2 different Pokemon that can take full advantage of that card count. You also have Radiant Charizard in here as a very strong 1 prize attacker that can swing into EX and V Pokemon and just one-shot them. You can also one-shot V-Star Pokemon potentially with the help of Choice Belt and Defiance Belt or Defiance Band as well. You have cards in here like Rotom V and Lumineon V for consistency, so if you're going first, you can always grab out your Rotom V and use Instant Charge, and if you're going second, you're probably going to want to grab your Cleffa and attack with that instead. Cleffa is one of the big notable inclusions a lot of decks are starting to include because it gets around Spiritomb. Some decks were playing Spiritomb to counter the Rotom V. Cleffa has a free retreat as well, which is just busted, so if they don't knock out your Cleffa, they're just going to get to freely retreat into your Charizard or whatever Pokemon you want to attack with. You also become slightly Rock-Sand or Brick-Proof with the help of the Barrel because you're just able to refill your hand with really good cards. And then you also have Professor Turo's Scenario in here, along with Collapse Stadium to become a one prize board state or just get rid of your Pokemon that you don't want to see on the board anymore, whether it be a Lumineon V or whether it be a Pidgeot EX that you're trying to deny your opponent from taking 2 prizes from, or even Charizard in some cases. Hit that like button down below, it helps out a ton. 1,000 likes and we'll drop the top 10 Rogue deck video. Just a reminder, I'll be doing a huge restock on my eBay store tonight, so you're going to want to check out my eBay store linked down below, and feel free to shop at the stores in the description as well to support the channel. With that said, I'll catch you guys in the next video. You can click on screen to watch another one and hang out some more, and yeah, see you later. Peace.